So first of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody that's been engaging with all the content so far on the channel and has been finding it valuable and sort of giving me that positive feedback. And that's not because my fragile ego needs that positive feedback to get through my own day, but it's more actually about the way that it helps to energize me, because I feel like I have a better and more intuitive sense of what you guys find valuable. So I get these ideas and I'm energized by these ideas. I'm like, oh yeah, people would love this in a video. This builds upon this other thing that people are already enjoying, or maybe this is a new kind of spin or a different area that I haven't yet covered of this particular topic. And, you know, as I kind of do more and more content, I'm getting more of a sense of a sort of the identity of what the channel should be. And it really is in large part kind of guided by what you guys want. And so this has been really, really a cool process to go through. So this video today will likely be a series of videos, and it's going to be about how you can kind of help to talk back to certain, let's say, mental things that are happening, certain cognitive things, you know, thoughts that you have, feelings that you have that might actually be very detrimental to your performance in the game. And so this one is going to be about essentially like this, what happens when you are kind of pulled out of your focus to play the game and to execute your tasks because the result that you're looking for is not happening. So, for example, this is in the outcome-oriented world of thinking, where, you know, outcome-orientedness, we've established many times that this is a bad way to think, ultimately because you can't really control for the outcome, but you can control for the process. And to ensure the best likelihood of the outcome you want, which is to win, you need to have the best process possible. And the problem is, what happens with outcome-oriented thinking is that once we're like, oh, let's see if we're winning. Oh shit, we're not winning. Okay, now you know, you can start to have a lot of different thoughts that might settle in your mind that will pull you out of the focus of what you're actually doing. I made a video recently about focus and attention and how important that is. And this is very much connected to that idea, because when we have these negative thoughts or we react to the fact that, oh, I'm not getting the outcome I'm looking for, because we have this emotional connection, right, to winning. And that's what we're here to do. And it confirms that maybe our training's going well. It confirms that we're making those improvements that we're looking for. It feels good emotionally. You know, it gives us a bit of a hit of dopamine and just makes us just feel better about ourselves. There's all these different reasons why you want that outcome. But the problem is, and ironically, you know, paradoxically, the more that you try to force the outcome, the less likely it is to happen, because you can't do anything about that outcome except to make sure you have the best process. And to have the best process, you cannot be wasting your attention and your focus on trying to force the outcome. Because if you're thinking about that outcome, that is all mental energy and thoughts and emotions that are swirling around you that are occupying your own attention and focus. And that attention and focus, as we established, is a resource, and you want to divert all those resources of focus and attention to the process, to be super dialed into making good decisions, executing on your mechanics, you know, making sure that you're communicating with your team, whatever it might be, all the things that you have built into your gameplay to get into the zone. If you think about that concept about when you're in the zone, you're completely dialed in. You're not thinking about anything really. You're just almost, let's say, seeing the future. That's like one way to put it. You're kind of, everything slows down. You're looking into the future, and really what you're doing here is you're really tapped into your intuition, your expert intuition. That's this predictive system. And so this is like game sense on crack, essentially, is what's happening. You have all these timings and all these things mapped out in your brain, and you're this clairvoyant entity kind of picking the most likely outcome, and your game sense is so attuned at that moment that you're picking the right outcomes with very high likelihood. And so because of that, you react faster, you're calmer, you're looser, you know, you're having more fun, you're more kind of engaged. That's where we want to be. So if you think about that most optimal state, and then you think about what could be happening when you're focused on the outcome, you're really in this position where you're just doing something that's harming you. And so this is really, I think, one principle we can think about, which is, again, I'm reinforcing the idea. We need to be really conscious about where our attention is going, and we need to understand, is it helping us or not helping us? And so having a better control of your attention and understanding where it's going is really powerful. And so today, one idea that I think is important is this sense of, you look at the outcome, you recognize that you're not winning, and you're, let's say, already doing a good job with your performance. And there's a very common tendency, and I've had this tendency many times, and it's especially one that you'll experience when you're playing ranked, because you have even less control when you're playing ranked, because you don't have a bunch of teammates where you've got some set stuff that you can rely upon, that you've all come together and agreed, this is how we're going to play, this is how it should work, this is what I can trust you to do. We've got these certain protocols established. You've got all these controls that you guys have set up ahead of time. When you go into a ranked game and you're starting to lose, there's a great tendency to try to, again, because you're suddenly realizing, oh, I'm not, getting the outcome that I'm looking for, which is the win, or we're getting further and further away from the win because we're losing rounds or whatever. Now I'm going to try to do more. I'm going to focus on trying to force the outcome, and I'm going to try to do more than my job could ever really be reasonably expected to do. So you end up taking risks that don't make sense. And this is because of this idea also of the illusion of control. And this is something that we really want to have. We want to really have this control for the outcome. So our brain almost gives us this sense that, oh, if I just try to do more than is reasonable, then we're going to get to that outcome. And so what you end up doing is you end up making a lot of mistakes. You end up playing too aggressive, too risky, and you actually end up putting your team in a worse position than they were before, as opposed to accepting the fact that you can only do so much in your role, in your position, and there is perhaps a certain degree of added risk that you might want to put in, but it should fall within the realm of what you already find acceptable within the way you want to play the game. If you're just running it down and being hyper aggressive and going for like these crazy flanks and doing stuff that's super high risk, and that's just what you're drawn to because you feel like, well, I have to do it because none of my teammates can. Well, in reality, you're just setting yourself up to fail. And what you're also doing is you're predicting the future. And sometimes, you might be predicting the future quite well because, hey, maybe your teammates really are really rubbish and everyone's getting completely destroyed, but you are predicting the future. And this happens a lot in ranked where, you'll see it even after a few rounds. A lot of players will start to give up. What they're doing is they're predicting the future. They don't understand that their opponents are just as likely to make mistakes as they are. And so if you start to predict the future and you start to imagine that the opponents will never not be losing, they'll never not be hitting all of their shots, then what you're doing is you're really setting yourself up to fail. And so this is another place where our attention can wander, where we can get in trouble. Because if you're starting to think, well, oh my God, this guy's hitting every single shot, now you might be saying, well, he's going to hit every shot in the future as well, which is not necessarily true. And if we start to think about this, I think it's quite logical and reasonable to assume that this is a complete waste of time to think like this, because what ends up happening is you end up building up your opponents in your mind, and you also end up, by doing so, destroying your confidence, because the larger a pedestal you put the opponent on, the lower down you are compared to them. So it's going to have a knock on your confidence to do that. And so it's really important to not respect your opponents, not to over-respect them. You want to respect them within the realms of what you feel like is a good decision for your role and for the situation. And sometimes you have to take risks. And so what often happens at the competitive level is, and we talk about this concept with the play to win versus play not to lose mentality. The play not to lose mentality is one feature, I would say, of this type of thinking, where you build up the opponents in such a way that you're suddenly diverting from the path of what would be considered good decision making, and you're changing your decision making based off of this emotional necessity, essentially, for you at that time, which is to, you can't really handle like giving it your all and still losing. You can't really handle, that emotional outcome, or the outcome that if you lose, like you're essentially hedging. That's essentially what's happening in those moments. And so there's all these things that are connected to this sense of you trying to control for the outcome. So in that instance, with the playing not to lose, you're controlling for this outcome of, well, I actually feel like there's this strong suspicion I have that we will lose. And so I'm just going to play to maybe minimize how bad that's going to be. Or I'm going to play to not put everything into it, because if we do end up losing, then, there's this part of me that's like, well, you didn't put everything in. And subconsciously, that you didn't put everything in. So you're not going to really, you're not going to feel as bad. So you're protecting yourself emotionally to not feel as bad. And so again, if we think about this rationally, if we look at what's really going on, it doesn't make any sense. It's a terrible place to be. But this is the way that the mind can kind of trick us. So we've got to be very cautious about these thinking patterns. And there's so many versions of this. And so again, it always comes back to, if you can focus just on the process and refine the process and the decision making over time, you're going to be in a better place. And I'm not saying that there's not this reality that exists where if you're taking a swing and you keep losing this swing, should you keep doing it? That's an interesting question. What are the best ways to approach that? If you've decided that this is a good swing and you've decided it because of how the mechanics work in the game, like it's a good angle, it's a good timing to make this swing, it's something that we've decided strategically or tactically is necessary, then you should take the swing. And if you're not hitting your shots, then you need to analyze, maybe look at your movement, look at your mechanics. Do you need to level up your mechanics? These are the kinds of questions you actually need to ask yourself. But it always comes from that first thing. In terms of the process, is a decision good? And then you can look at the other elements afterwards. But if it's ever the case that you're thinking, well, this guy's like hitting every shot, and you're thinking about the outcomes, then you know that you're not thinking about it correctly. And again, as I mentioned, the outcome-oriented thinking is usually an emotionally driven way of thinking that doesn't benefit us to what we can actually do to keep our focus on what's important, which is the process. So if you ever find yourself in that position where you're thinking, okay, I got to go crazy, I got to do everything here, then you're already taking yourself out of your predefined patterns of play. And if you're doing that to take a lot of risks because you're thinking, well, I have to do it all, let's just remember, you're in a team game. You can only do what you can do to set your team up as best you can in your role to succeed. You can't take over the game every time by yourself, and to be trapped in that mentality is only going to make you more frustrated, because what you're doing is you're also condemning your teammates in that action as well. And you're not allowing yourself to rely on them. You're probably going to be communicating with them less because you don't have any trust with them anymore. And, so I'm not saying that you're not going to be in ranked games where you're not going to have a bunch of garbage teammates that can't do anything and can't communicate. That's obviously a reality. But my point is that we really need to separate this reality from fact. And we need to understand that sometimes it just sucks and you just have to accept the situation, and you have to think about, is my process good, or am I taking myself out of my own process? Because lastly, I think one of the main points here too is that you want to have a consistency to that process that you're building, because the more consistency that you have to the way that you make choices in the game, the better it will be for you as a player that's growing, because it's way easier for you to say, okay, I need to kind of change this bit about my game. If everything's more consistent in how you do things, it's way easier to make changes, and it's way easier to see where the leaks are. If you're all over the place because of how emotionally driven you are as a player, it's way harder to actually figure out where the leaks are. So make sure you understand where your focus is. Try not to get into emotionally driven behaviors, and I wish you the best of luck in your journey growing as a player.